Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's ESTO webinar with Miles Partnership. My name is Amanda Wang, coordinator on the ESTO team, and I'm so glad that you could join us. Today's presentation is part of a series of marketing webinars created to keep DMO marketing professionals up to date with applicable and inventive content all year long. To stay on top of all ESTO happenings and upcoming webinars, visit us at esto.ustravel.org/webinars. U.S. Travel recognizes that this year has been more important than ever to provide destination marketing organizations with updated and creative ways to employ your organization's marketing efforts towards recovery, and we appreciate your support. For more information on U.S. Travel and to learn how you can become more involved with our research and advocacy efforts, please visit www.ustravel.org. A few housekeeping details before we start. We'll have an audience Q&A at the end of the session, so please send your questions in for our panelist or our speaker throughout the session through your questions tab on the GoToWebinar widget. This recording and slides for the session will be sent out to all attendees in a recap email and will also be made available on the ESTO website for U.S. Travel members to access. Please take a couple minutes at the end of the webinar to take our survey. It'll pop up once the webinar has closed. Now I'd like to introduce our presenter for today's webinar, Ryan Thompson, Senior Vice President at Miles Partnership. Ryan, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Amanda. Pleasure to be with everyone this afternoon. I wish we were together in person, but we're going to make the most of it. Today, we're going to talk about storytelling during COVID. Cost-effective approaches to engagement. And what I want to give you in this session is sort of a peek behind the curtains of what we've experienced inside of our content studio at Miles during the past 6 or 7 months, how we've approached it, and give you some practical takeaways to end this webinar on how you could perhaps implement some of those things. As Amanda said, I'm Ryan Thompson. I'm a Senior Vice President here at Miles. I'm also the managing director of our in-house content studio, Odyssey. It's a team of about 22 people, and much of what we're going to talk about today is how our Odyssey unit has applied storytelling during this unusual time. January, February, we were on the road with multiple crews every week, and suddenly that all came to a halt. And so I wanted to give you a peek behind the scenes on how we did all that stuff. So let's set the stage. I don't think any of us have used the word unprecedented as much as we probably have in 2020 in our entire lives. So much so that I think we're probably getting tired of it. But it became apparent very quickly in mid-March that the world was changing very quickly. It also became apparent through surveys and research and just monitoring even our personal social media channels that while people had fear and were concerned, these isolated consumers, they still wanted to dream, they still wanted to be inspired for travel, and many of us were trying to figure out how to answer those asks from our consumers to do that. But it was clear it's going to be very different in the coming period. So we identified 4 key challenges at the outset. This is probably mid-March, spring break time period. The first was, our assumption was filming new productions would be restricted to at least for the coming 4 to 8 weeks. That was not correct thinking. It was a little longer than that, and in many cases still today, but I'm sure you all remember the fond thinking that maybe by June or July this would all be past us. But regardless, the way we were doing things had to change very quickly. Our destination clients that we were filming for began to ask pretty tough questions. One of the key questions was, what's the right message at a time when our stakeholders and attractions are closed? I mean, for those, some felt they shouldn't be marketing, some felt it was critical to market, but how do you even market when you can't invite people to your community? An ongoing debate, a debate that's still very relevant today, and one I've had this morning, is the representation of COVID. And really that means, do we show mask or do we not show mask in these productions? And we're going to speak to that a little later. And I guess lastly, and one that I think we're all unfamiliar with, is the uncertainty that is that created this environment where it's impossible to predict the future, still today. Not that we ever could predict the future, but at least we could assume that we knew what a March and a summer and a fall and a winter period looked like. That all changed, and it all changed in a matter of days. And so the approach we took was to listen to clients, to listen to consumers, and to sort of follow the data. And so we knew those would be our challenges, but where we went from there was to look at the data that was available, to commission some new research, and to monitor sort of sentiment on a weekly basis. I'll pause for a second and say everything that I'm using in this presentation is available to anyone for free on this webinar. You can reach all the content I've got here related to data at covid19.milespartnership.com. There's really a wealth of stuff there. I'm going to give you a snapshot of the things that inspired us specifically related to storytelling and content. But, you know, step over there if you want to get more. We tried to summarize it in a way that makes it actionable for you as much as possible. So these slides, or this data, begins to tell the story of where we went next, where we went in April and May and then the months beyond. And the first thing we really looked at was less than half of US locals feel comfortable shopping or dining locally. Notice on the bottom left, this says Wave 22, October 13th. So in partnership with Longwoods, we commissioned research on a weekly basis, the travel sentiment study, and each week was titled a wave. So this is the 22nd week we have measured this. And this is a date as of about a week ago. And so this is not old, it's very new. And still today, almost half, over half of our audience feel like, you know, they're uncomfortable with shopping and dining locally. And so that's something we got to consider. I mean, obviously, if our locals have a fear and concern about that, how can we expect our travelers to want to participate in those kinds of activities? Meanwhile, something I think we probably all implicitly know, but the data, it's great to have the data support it, which is the trips people would be taking when they plan their fall travel were overwhelmingly in the category of two things: visiting friends and family and taking a road trip, which frankly is probably a lot of the same trips put together. And so this idea of the road trip is not new to us now, but certainly as we looked at this in March and April, it began to be very obvious that that was the path that we were all going to be taking. Then you look at the other things that people plan to do. So during that road trip or during that visit to friends and family, what are they doing? Well, again, overwhelmingly, the top 4 or 5 things are all outdoors: national park, monument, fall foliage, hike and bike, farmers market, and sort of the list goes on. So that began very early to frame our thinking of how we should approach content and stories and the kinds of content that people wanted. We felt so strongly, and the research led so strongly toward road trips, that we actually, with Longwoods, created a research summary about this. You can get it on that site we talked about, but it's an infographic, and it's really interesting and addresses a lot of this stuff. So go grab that if you want to. So then we pivot to questions about health and safety, and again, you know, people said, well, we thought we probably knew, but it's great to see it through data. So the overall concerns: I'm hesitant to travel because travel restrictions are unclear in the destination I'm visiting, or they vary, or health and safety protocols are unclear, or they vary. And so clearly, as we probably know as individuals with our own family, health and safety was on the forefront and was going to heavily inspire what we did next. It's hard to believe that something as simple as a mask has become a politicized issue, but all politics aside, let's look just at what the data says about masks. So what's the influence of face mask requirements on destination choices? And again, this is our travel sentiment study with a large sample size that Longwoods manages in partnership with us. So 35% said I will only visit destinations that require the use of face masks in public. And then the next level, 26% said I am more likely to visit destinations that require the use of face masks. And so wherever we feel about it individually, our travelers, a majority of them want to see the mask. And I think it's a demonstration of safety for them. And so that began to influence our thinking. And then during this time, through this sentiment survey, we began to look at how people's media consumption habits were perhaps changing. And while they did change some, they didn't change that much. I mean, perhaps surprisingly, a lot of people were still getting their information from print. A magazine article on travel was 31%, pardon, of the content they viewed during COVID-19. And then quickly followed by a short online travel video. And so I think the visual content, especially recently produced visual content that maybe address some of these concerns, were of great interest to our audience. And no surprise for those who said they were ready to travel, that bottom item, 52% said they were using social media to get their travel information to plan their travel. So this began to really frame our thinking. The last thing we looked at, we've all heard about pent-up demand, but is it real? And our studies show it absolutely is. 69% of travelers indicated they would change their travel plans in the next 6 months due to COVID, but pent-up demand for travel remains strong, with 65% of those travelers indicating they will plan a trip in the next 6 months. And you can see the story the blue chart says. They changed their travel to one they can drive to as opposed to fly to, and it's just been slowly, for the most part, consistently ticking up week over week. So what does that all mean? I mean, we're all inundated with data, but for us, it meant sort of four key things, four conclusions that we arrived at that were inspired by this research. So the first is that recovery starts at home. I mean, again, if locals aren't participating in these activities, how can we expect our travelers to? Tourism activities, being out and about, dining, those kinds of things. So we felt like we needed to create content that empowers locals to sort of get out and experience in a safe way and support their local businesses. Clearly, opportunities exist in this visiting friends and relatives market and drive. The confusion and concern could be significant impediments. They certainly have been. And probably multimedia storytelling would be key. Travelers continue to turn to a wide range of media, but video specifically has grown, specifically on social. And I think it's because, as a substitute for being there, I mean, video, well-produced video with audio and good visuals is the best substitute for being there. So if we can show them how to experience a destination safely during this time, and to do so in a responsible way, that's probably the best kind of story we can tell. So where do we go from here? I wanted to show you three examples of projects that we produced during COVID for three different areas of the country at three different sizes. So the first was for San Francisco. We took a already scheduled shoot, and we took a cue from network television and said, let's learn from the big guys. And so within days of COVID happening in March, you will probably all recall, and even still today, that we were seeing anchors in their home. We were seeing broadcasts at a new level of quality, somewhat diminished. We were seeing kids and dogs and all kinds of things, and we were becoming accustomed to it. And so taking a cue from network TV, we sort of quickly beefed up our abilities to produce remotely. And here's what that looked like. So we wanted to prepare parallel messages for San Francisco. One was one that said, our gate is open, so we're ready to welcome back travelers. And the other was a welcome back soon message. And the reality was, we didn't together know with the San Francisco Tourism Office when the recovery would start, when things would open up. So we were preparing for both of those contingencies. And so we planned our shoot around that. We planned our shot list to produce footage or source footage that would allow us to produce both of those pieces. We then remotely produced what we would normally have sent a 5 to 7 person crew for. So we identified and hired a local San Francisco-based camera operator, and we outfitted them with a custom kit that we built, again, learning from network television. This simplified some of the tools that we used in the past. It used things like Zoom and laptops and iPhones to create connectivity. And we created a safety protocol that allowed that camera operator to enter homes or in some cases businesses of those we were going to shoot. And then we took existing B-roll and existing footage and created content around that. And so it became a much different kind of shoot, a much simpler shoot. And let me play that video for you now. You're seeing the "We hope to welcome you back soon" message. Currently, the Our Gate is Open message is actually running in the San Francisco market. So I'm going to switch here for a second and play this video through another screen.
The city supports their sports teams so tremendously. Getting the opportunity to play for the San Francisco Giants has been an incredible honor and an incredible gift.
San Francisco is just an inspiration in and of itself. The energy there, the people, the architecture, just so absolutely breathtaking.
San Francisco is bursting with things that people love to do.
I love coaching in San Francisco because I think it's the most beautiful city in the country. There's this beautiful love for basketball that exists, just electric.
I get my inspiration from being around folks all over the city.
The physical beauty is really special.
I find inspiration in the people.
San Francisco is just a special place.
San Francisco has always been associated with the joy of life.
Okay, helps to be unmuted. So how did we do it? Taking you behind the scenes for just a moment. This is what that shot looks like in the opening footage. And so, excuse me, we were in a home. And while we did beef up some of our production tools to allow us to stream high resolution content over the internet, honestly, we were using the same tools we use today. We were using Zoom to allow our remote producers in Florida to speak to the talent. And we had one camera operator on site with a very simple setup that you see on screen here. And so we were able to speak, we were able to give them a return so they could see what we were asking and talking about. But it became a very simple process and one where we could effectively produce content, again, using a lot of existing B-roll and footage. The second example I want to show you is something we did for the Chattanooga Tourism Company. And as COVID was affecting different places in different ways, with varying levels of things being open, we thought the local approach would work really well here. And we employed something that we called user-directed content. And so first and foremost, the tourism office wanted to show Chattanooga during COVID in a safe and responsible way. And so with Chattanooga, we concepted the We Love Chattanooga campaign. And we employed, again, what we call UDC, or user-directed content, which we all know UGC, user-generated content, has so many benefits. I mean, we've probably all heard that consumers see it as a more genuine type of footage, not overly produced and not overly commercialized. The problem from a studio standpoint is that UGC is sort of the Wild West. You never know what you're going to get. You never know if it's great quality or not great quality. The audio could be terrible, it could be inappropriate. And so how could we employ UGC in a more directed way? That's where we partnered with a technology company out of Colorado and created what we call user-directed content. And so with UDC, what we're able to do is give consumers via a small app on their iPhone the ability to shoot content, just like they would use their camera. But unlike their camera, it gives them more direction. So the app will tell them, pick up a shot list. So show a drink being made, and we'll give them instructions. It'll also tell them to turn their phone to landscape if that's what we desired, or to change their audio settings. So as this content was coming in, all content arrived real time to our cloud, so our producers in Florida could review that footage in real time. And I don't mean after the fact. I mean literally as the content's being produced, it's arriving. So we're able to push messages back to our users and asked them to get different shots or film different shots. And so let me show you an example of how that played out. And again, as you watch this, I want you to imagine all of it being shot with iPhones, all of it being shot without a team member from our studio on site or in direct connection with them.
We really try to emphasize craft cocktails and quality of beverages.
And we make sure that we are on the same page as far as how we steam our milk to how we dilute with the right kind of ice for our cocktails. We buy quality coffee, we buy certain graded coffee, we roast it a certain way. Same thing with our cocktails and our alcoholic beverages. Our wells are high quality spirits. We work with some amazing distilleries around the US.
We designed a unique environment that invites people in.
What we're trying to do is cultivate a space where people in Chattanooga could experience a culture holistically through music, food, drink, without having to leave their hometown. We're just trying to do everything we can on a daily basis to adjust, keep people employed, take care of the staff that are still technically with us. Here we are, we're doing this together. Let's keep doing it together and keep trying to take it to the next level.
So again, everything shot on iPhones, uploaded to our cloud. Let me just make sure. There we go. Now you can see my screen. And here's what that looks like. And so as a user was shooting something, and we're able to push a message to them that says, Travis P., those last shots were great. Get a few more of the crowd. And so the benefits of UDC and the way that we designed this come in a number of forms. One is by reducing the camera crew and the equipment, we had a tangent benefit of significantly reducing the cost of production. Two is we still used a professional post-production process and pre-production process. So we still planned out a professional shoot. We still created shot lists and lined up talent and did the right releases and those kinds of things. And on the back end, we still took this into professional tools like Final Cut Pro or Adobe Premiere to produce these things. But what came from this were a handful of local produced videos that showed local business operating in a safe and responsible environment at a time when there was really no other option. We really couldn't have flown in probably April or May and done this in any other way had we not applied the UDC thinking. And then I want to show you one more for the state of Louisiana. Here, we really focused on repurposing existing assets. And I'm sure for those of you who are on the phone, you know what a shoot's like. You know, it's a big effort. You have hours and hours of footage. And what you get from your production company is a crisp, well-produced 30, 60, 90-second spot. But what about the rest of that footage? Oftentimes, that footage gets forgotten. It's stored on a drive. It's kept in a digital asset management system. But what do you do with it in the future? So often it's never used again. And so we looked at the assets we had and we said, how can we accomplish some results that the state of Louisiana was asking us to accomplish? So specifically in that case, we helped concept a 4-phased recovery plan for Louisiana that really directly related to the different stage of reopening that the state was in. So phase 1 was something where we said, let's produce strictly natural outdoor locations. No people, natural sound only, no music. And this was intended to be, this is the March, April time period, and this is when probably the most uncertainty about this pandemic was present. I mean, we're all beginning to live with it now, but then who knew what would happen next? And so we thought, with all the negativity people are experiencing, with all the fear that's present on social media, what if we give them something else? What if we give them sort of a breath of fresh air or something relaxing that calmed them down? And that's what phase 1 was for us. Phase 2 is still outdoors focused, but now we're adding people back. Maximum of 2, sometimes 1. We start to incorporate music, but it really is intended to be more of a natural sound. And so not dissimilar from maybe the approach we took with more of a local, small talent approach in Chattanooga. Then phase 3, which we're not in yet, would be restaurant focused. It'll be launching soon because unfortunately, Louisiana has also gone through a couple of hurricanes But once we reach that stage of reopening, we'll begin to introduce restaurants, and phase 4 would expand that even further and go into more road trip themes. And so, timing will allow us to know when we're going to do that. So let me show you a video from phase 1 and phase 2. And I want to point out how different the content is in phase 1 than what you typically see out there, especially in social media, and how natural it is. Let me play that for you right now. Calming, relaxing, again, presented at a time when people were really starting to want to get back outdoors, to want to do something other than to be cooped up. And had some interesting results from it I'll share with you. Now, let me show you a video from phase 2. So with that evolution, you can probably start to imagine then where phase 3 and 4 might go. But it's had some really interesting initial success. Just for phase 1, just in the first few weeks, using a small paid but strongly organic approach, some of those initial results, we had almost 300,000 views on Facebook, 26,000 and change overall engagements. On YouTube, we had over 30,000 views. On Twitter, over 8,200 views. And so definitely was getting the results that we had hoped for when we designed that together with the state. So perhaps the largest discussion around this topic is sort of what we might call the great mask debate. Do we show masks in these videos or do we not? And let me play a video, I think, that represents the approach that I would recommend well. And it's a commercial you've probably seen. It's from AT&T. It's frankly everywhere right now. So let me play that for you and let's talk about it for a second.
Can't wait to tell everyone about AT&T's big 5G news.
AT&T has nationwide 5G?
Yep.
And that's faster?
Faster, yeah.
But is it reliable?
Uh-huh, and secure.
You should consider making a big deal about it.
Bigger?
I said bigger.
Oh, bigger deal, bigger than what I'm doing?
It's not complicated. A 5G network needs a 5G device. Now everyone, including existing customers, can get a free Samsung Galaxy Note 20 after trade-in.
So I suspect you have seen that that commercial. It's really prevalent and everywhere right now. But when I first saw that commercial, here's what it did for me. Let's go back to the research and data for a second and remember that people have concerns about and confidence concerns about health and safety, about is the destination safe. And so what I've heard from clients who approach me and say, we don't want to show masks in our video, is that it's going to make us look bad. I would argue strongly that that's the wrong approach. And here's why. Unlike what we're used to, Asian countries have worn masks when they move about and travel for many, many years. And it's a very normal thing. I would say now, 6 or 7 months into this pandemic, you no longer feel unusual seeing people wearing masks. Frankly, I feel a little more unusual when I see people not wear a mask. When my wife and I sit on the couch and watch TV and we see groups of people hugging or shaking hands with no mask on, we immediately say that was obviously filmed before COVID. So I think what this commercial did for me was it showed, one, timeliness. This was obviously produced recently. It demonstrates, without saying it, that the AT&T store is a safe place. This person was across the glass wearing a mask. It addressed the mask topic without making it all about the mask topic. And so we frankly think, we can't predict the future, but we think that the masks are probably part of our future for some period of time, but at least they're not unusual. They're something that demonstrate a sign of safety and responsibility versus the opposite. And so if that's your only impediment in producing content, I'd still produce the content. Again, don't make it about the mask, but make it such that you're telling a story and demonstrating through that visual that it's a safe and responsible action that you're taking. So I promised you 5 takeaways. I'm going to give you those 5 takeaways, and then we will move to Q&A in just a couple of minutes. The first would be this: be willing to change, adopt new approaches to match the times. And so we had discussions very early on in March about sort of breaking the rules. I heard people in conference rooms tell me that's not the way it's done. Well, we have never faced a pandemic like this. And so take a cue from those big guys. Watch how the major networks are doing it. Watch how the NFL did the draft, and be willing to change. Adopt new approaches to match the times. I mean, or the other option is to not do anything at all. And so, match the times, be willing to change. The second is agility. I mean, I think that when you think about how rapidly things change and how rapidly information becomes available during this time, I mean, much of the work that I shared with you today was not planned over months, it was planned over days. And so I think we need to be in that format. Speed is key during this evolving uncertainty. And if you want to get a message out there that's timely, you're probably going to have to do it considerably faster than what you're used to. Be appropriate. I mean, that's the mask discussion, which is consider safety in the tone of your messaging. But there's ways to do it, like the AT&T commercial, where I think you don't have to be necessarily overt, but you still get your point across. I would encourage experimentation. I mean, experimentation by its definition implies that you might fail. And experiments that fail are fine because it leads you to a good outcome. We've all seen it on network TV. The kid comes in the commercial, the dog barks, the dog jumps on the laptop. And what do the personalities do? They make a joke of it, they make light of it, and probably you feel more connected with them as a human being than you do when they're in their polished Madison Avenue studios. That's okay. Experiment, and if it doesn't work, show your personality. And then again, utilize and repurpose those existing assets. Taking that content, surrounding it with either voiceover or natural sound audio, or just recutting something and putting it on social media, even organically, or maybe with a small boosted budget, has been tremendously successful for us and our clients during these times. So those are my 5 key takeaways for you. We'll be able to share this presentation recording, as Amanda said, afterwards. If I don't have the chance to answer all of your Q&A in the next few minutes, feel free to reach out to me. My Twitter DM and email are on screen right now. But we'll now move over to Q&A and see what questions we have, Amanda.
Awesome, thanks, Ryan. So yes, like Ryan said, we are now taking questions. So if you have any questions specifically for Ryan or regarding any of the videos or examples that he gave, please feel free to submit them in the questions tab in your GoToWebinar widget. So the first question that came in is, what about when you do use existing content and footage, but people are not wearing masks? Do you need to put a disclaimer that this was shot before COVID?
So I think you need to think about what the intent of the message is. And so, I have seen instances where people say this was shot before COVID, we're adhering to safety messages. If that's all we can do, I suppose it's okay. But to me, as a consumer, it gives you pause and it gives you a reason to question. And that's something I don't think we want our consumers normally to do. So what I'd say, when I say utilize existing footage, in the case of all 3 of those, we did utilize existing footage, but we still shot something here or there. So I'd say, let's say you're going to promote your downtown. Would it be possible to shoot a 10 or 15-second clip of someone walking down the street safely wearing their mask on a similarly sunny day as when the original footage was shot, and weave that in. And so maybe it takes an hour to shoot it, but through audio mixing and through the way that you cut the video, it all seamlessly works together. I would encourage something more like that than necessarily putting an overt message on screen, just because again, what I think we're trying to say is that, you know, we're giving safety and confidence, and if we put an overt message on screen like that, I'm not a huge fan of that.
Got it. Another question that came in is, what would you suggest from an editorial or blog writing and or social media perspective for destinations with a limited budget?
That's a great question. So I think so let's go back and think about the research. What are the safety precautions? What are the restrictions and regulations? You could further probably intimate from that or infer from that what's open, when's it open. We found through our work with like the Google DMO program that businesses have changed hours and different things like that, and so their business listings in Google aren't necessarily correct. I would produce content that is more about assisting and answering those kinds of questions. So I'd let the research, like the research we put in this presentation, guide you and create content around that. And so you may create a top 5 things to do in my city, but in doing so, you would probably do less just aspirational marketing content and more practical, action-oriented content. These businesses are open. This business has a large, expansive patio. What are the rules and regulations? Mask required, because all that factual data is going to build confidence. And so I'd probably build around that. I mean, people are looking for things to do. People are telling us in these sentiment surveys the kinds of things they want to do, which are largely outdoors, at least in the fall. How can you create content that help them arrive at those conclusions in your destination and know that they can do it in a safe and responsible way?
Yeah, great. And I think, yeah, like you said, it's so important to build confidence right now. And with people's budgets suffering this year, I think having a quick kind of blog post just listing out those attractions or activities that they can do is a small step that you can take towards informing your community or your travelers. Another question along the lines of a budget that's being hit, going back to the video production, are these methods less expensive, or is there still a lot of legwork on your end that doesn't allow for cost savings? I guess they're implying the UDC content or the other methods that you had explained.
Yeah, in every example I gave, they are considerably less expensive. Now, I don't think they are substitutes for doing the proper, bigger productions we all sometimes need to do. For example, I think in the Chattanooga case, the intent was to make this look like a very organic local product. And so you probably saw the shot of the guy where he was almost looking down at his iPhone and explaining from what looked like maybe a bedroom what they had done in their business. That was intentional. We wanted to look less polished, more organic. And so I think from that standpoint, like UDC worked really well. I don't know that UDC would have worked as well in the San Francisco example, but as you know, I mean, the largest cost in a video production is really assembling the crew, getting the crew on site, getting equipment, and filming. And so post-production takes some time, but in those cases, in the cases that we shared with you, they were considerably less expensive, which was a tangent benefit because we didn't have those big expensive shoots. And so I think it's about, in our case, we would ask, what are the objectives you're trying to accomplish? Then what is your budget? And so we ask it in that order because we want to try to say, like, let's not miss what we're trying to do and what success means, but then what's the budget constraint? Let's try to find a way to do it. And if we can't, we can't. But in this case, we found 3 different ways to do it in 3 different examples.
For sure. And kind of like when you were talking about your San Francisco example and how maybe the UDC content wouldn't have been as applicable, would you continue to use remote directing even as we're moving closer towards recovery and you might be able to gather a larger staff on site?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, and my prediction for network television is the same too, which is let's just assume a time when we have entirely returned to normal, God willing, whenever that comes. I think we're still going to be more accustomed to Zoom meetings. I think the requirement to be in person will be less than it used to be. I think we'll still see reporters and anchors doing things in certain cases that we didn't see them do before. And so I think some of this is going to, excuse me, some of this is going to stick. Some of this will remain around. And so it does make for a more complicated pre-production period when we don't have people on site. It requires better planning. It requires better contingency planning. And, you know, again, you don't have necessarily the controls. And so I don't think it's always the solution, but we're certainly going to continue to explore what we've learned from this on how to apply it to new things. And I would encourage you to do the same.
Great. One question that I think is really applicable is, have you worked with clients on responses and language to negative engagement when showing masks and other safety procedures?
We have worked somewhat on that. We don't normally do PR inside of the Miles organization, and what I would sort of claim, or what I would sort of classify as crisis PR. I mean, I wouldn't call that a crisis, but it is the kind of language that you want to be very careful with. If we were to respond to that, I would suggest to be very, very neutral and not get caught up in it. But it's really about being safe and responsible for all of our travelers. And so a general message like that is what I would personally do. But you know, if you do have someone you work with from a PR standpoint, I would probably ask that question to them as well, because it's the kind of questions they're pretty used to answering, you know, when unusual things happen.
Right, and I'm sure they're fighting a lot of those questions since March this year. Does it make sense to shoot scenes with and without masks so that we have a new version ready post-pandemic? Or I guess just in the case of you releasing different part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, should you shoot them all at once and get prepared?
I think if the budget and situation allows, sure. I mean, if you have the opportunity to plan a production that serves multiple purposes, whether it's this purpose or another purpose, why not try to utilize and sort of kill two birds with one stone? My question would be, are you sort of functionally able to do that? So in many cases, the shooting that we're doing right now, this week, we're not allowed to shoot without mask on, nor would we really want to in the certain situations we're in. And so to us, it's not necessarily a matter of taking the mask on or off. It's about, in the situation we're in, it may not be appropriate right now. But if you have the ability, sure, I'd try it.
Great. Another question that came in is, what is the best social channel for sharing your video, and should you blanket them all or pinpoint one? YouTube, Vimeo, etc.
Boy, that's a big question with a lot of caveats. Here's what I can tell you. Instagram specifically, Facebook probably second, have been tremendous sources for us for social engagement. I think separate of that, I think we all know YouTube is the largest video network on the planet, still remains the #2 search engine after its big brother Google. And so I think YouTube as a social channel, not just a video hosting platform, is great. I often encourage clients to distinguish Vimeo and YouTube for those two reasons. Vimeo is a great platform. It's probably a prettier platform in a lot of ways, but it doesn't have the built-in distribution and reach that even organic YouTube does. And so I almost take YouTube and put it more in that social classification when I think about it that way. But if you were to start somewhere, I would start on Instagram. I would start on Facebook. I would customize messaging for those two platforms, probably shorter, sweeter, with hashtags on Instagram, whereas you may be more expansive and more elaborate in your story on Facebook. if budget allows it, I'd cut it into the right formats, which is, you know, more of a 1-by-1 on Instagram generally, and a variety of formats on Facebook. So I would consider where it's being used and what's the best presentation of the format. But in terms of sort of using the same video in those two places, I think it's fine. Just maybe consider length and the aspect ratio of it, and the message you put in the social content around it.
Great. So are you basing the decision to transition between phases based on consumer reactions? For example, something like San Francisco, when you had something like, "We look to welcome you back," and now that they're open, how do you decide the timing for that?
So our client ultimately decides the timing for that. And so the phased approach in Louisiana and the open or not open approach in San Francisco is ultimately a decision that the client makes. But I can tell you, they I believe, were basing that primarily on the state and city guidance that was being given by their elected officials. And so when we're allowed to reopen, we will move into the next phase and those kinds of things. So that's where a lot of that came from, but that's got to come from the client, in our opinion.
Right. Okay, another question that came in. Do you find videos perform better using cut down versions to adhere to Instagram's rules for sharing videos through their feed, or using a longer form through Instagram TV?
That's another complicated question. I can tell you that we use cut downs on Instagram to lead you to Instagram TV, to lead you to IGTV. We'll do the same on Facebook and Instagram for certain clients to lead you into YouTube for the longer form. And so I think I would go back to my statement before about it's pretty easy to do quick research and determine sort of average attention spans or average watch times on different platforms. And so I'd go look, I mean, treat IGTV and Instagram separately, and treat Facebook and Facebook Watch separately. Throw YouTube in the mix and go look for the average attention spans or watch times on video. And I'd probably orient it around that. But oftentimes we'll use the traditional social channels like IG and Facebook to do almost the movie trailer or the series trailer, if you will, to lead them into a longer form, generally on YouTube. But it just depends. But I'd let the research and how people are consuming that media guide you on making that decision.
Right. Going back to UDC, I think this is a topic that people are pretty interested in. How did you source and manage people to gather the UDC, and who financed it?
That's a great question. So we've used UDC in a number of environments pre-COVID and during COVID. And what we find is that there are plenty of people who want to be the next influencer, right? And so in some cases, we have put out a call to join the campaign just on organic Facebook. We did this with Visit Dallas, and given the reach of their organic audience, we had many people raise their hand who wanted to participate. Excuse me, my Texas allergies are killing me here. But with that, without any need for payment, we had a number of people raise their hand and say, well, I want to participate in this. I think they wanted to be on TV, if you will. And so in other cases, we have done more of a micro influencer approach where we might pay some nominal compensation for that, or perhaps help promote their social handles. In the case of Chattanooga, we worked with the client to identify those local businesses that we thought would be a good diverse representation of that community. And then we, through our pre-production process, reached out directly and secured call times for them to participate. And I think in other cases, you could contest it, where you basically say, you know, we're running an opportunity, and if you participate, you could win the big prize, or the second prize, or the third prize. But in our experience, there's not a lack of people willing to sort of film and be your, you know, your micro talent, if you will, for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's great. In geo-targeting intended markets, what is the best social platform to target baby boomers, millennials, and travelers with income to travel?
That's about 6 questions in one. I like that. Like, make it efficient, put them all in one. I think so. When we're to shift to the media discussion for a second, I mean, we're generally looking for 3 big categories when we're targeting through media. The first is demographic, the classic sort of household income, those kinds of things. The second is geographic, and the third is behavioral, or what some call psychographic, which is more sort of how we live our lives and those kinds of things. It's hard to answer what the best platform is because there are so many benefits from one versus the other. Since we've talked a lot about Facebook today, I'll tell you that platforms like Facebook and by extension Instagram have pretty deep targeting from those for those specific areas that I think you can accomplish a lot with. And then in other cases, to do more precise targeting, we may engage media partners who just specialize in a niche or just specialize in certain audiences, or we may employ influencers on those things. But I guess if I gave you an action item, I'd say if you haven't dived deep into Facebook Business Manager recently and looked at the targeting you can do with Instagram and Facebook, it's probably worth a look. It's pretty impressive. It's not the end all be all, but there's a lot you can do on a relatively small budget in somewhat of a self-service way.
Definitely. And the last question that I have here is, I know you touched on this earlier, but for organizations with a smaller budget or a significantly cut budget, what are other marketing solutions that you would suggest if they can't afford something like video production? I know you mentioned, a simple blog post, or you've been talking about social media, but I was wondering, what are a couple other options that they can employ during this time?
I mean, I think we've talked about them, but I'll restate them. I think social media, starting with organic and maybe doing some promoted posting with tens of dollars or hundreds of dollars can get you big results. We've talked about big video production done in a new way during today's session, but you don't always have to do that. I mean, don't be afraid to pull your iPhone out and film a pretty good video. And do it with minor editing and put it out there as, here's what's happening in downtown this afternoon. I think going live on Facebook and going live on Instagram continues to be something that's increasing and improving. Using promoted posts, even with those small dollars, is a great way to build an audience if your audience isn't that large. And then I'd probably write blog content around those things you've done and maybe repost that video there. And so if it's an afternoon in downtown, film the videos, write the piece, put the videos in the piece, and then put the videos out on the social as 4 or 5 separate posts, and get sort of 8 or 9 marketing hits out of one activity. There's a lot you can do by filming on your iPhone. I mean, again, all of that Chattanooga content was filmed on the iPhone. In some cases, we guided the client on light. In some cases, we had them record using a separate device, which also is not terribly expensive. And so, there's a lot of articles out there about how to up your production using an iPhone. I think there's a lot to look at there.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm tempted to go take my own iPhone outside and capture some scenery. But thank you everyone so much for joining in on our ESTO webinar. If you have any additional questions, I know that Ryan shared his contact information. You can always submit them to that ESTO email, esto@ustravel.org, and we can forward them along to him. But thank you so much for joining us. Ryan, thank you so much for your insight on this. Very helpful for us to think about different ways that we can tell our stories and talk to our travelers. And as a reminder, the recording and materials will be made available in a recap email coming out tomorrow. And have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. My pleasure.